it was no longer fulfilling. And I never wanted to be the educator in the classroom who was just there for the paycheck. The majority of your educators have the right heart and they have the right spirit behind them, but there are a lot who don't, and they are a detriment to our educational system. And so I was not going to be that. So when I started sensing that tension where I was not getting that fulfillment and I wanted to kind of break away, I said, I need to take those active steps. And so I started to explore what that would look like to go back to law.
My guest today is Temi Siyanbade. She is a Houston-based attorney, also a author, a thought leader. She's also the creator of Ask Temi Live, which is her own YouTube channel where she helps business owners and entrepreneurs by giving them legal advice. And we had an amazing conversation in regards to her career. And actually, I brought her on the show to mainly talk about how she pivoted from being a educator to an attorney. But she also shares with us how even after passing the bar as an attorney, she struggled even being around other attorneys. And so she talked with us about her fears and her successes. She talked about even struggling with imposter syndrome. And this was, like I said, an amazing conversation. It was so good. I had to break it up into two parts. So this is part one of our conversation, which is very valuable. So if you're looking at pivoting your career or changing careers, she offers some great advice in regards to changing careers. Also, if you struggle with imposter syndrome, which I'm sure we all have, she gives great advice in regards to dealing with that. So this is again part one of our conversation. So let's go ahead and get into today's episode. With us today, Miss Temi. Welcome to the 24-Hour Boss podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm so excited to be here. You and I both know it was a little bit of a journey, but we're here. We made it.
We are here. Yes, we are here now. So we got to do this show. But yes, thank you for accepting the invite. I
Absolutely.
definitely appreciate your time. And I am just excited to have you here and just for you to share your thoughts with our audience. So I see that you are a first generation Nigerian born American. And so I guess, would like for you to maybe share with us or with our audience, your background, your heritage, and maybe all of that good stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm a very proud Nigerian American. I rep my green, white, green. And so what that means as a first gen, some people call it depends. I think more intuitively, I consider myself a first generation, but then technically, some people will say second generation. And for me, what that means is that my parents were not born in the United States. My parents were actually born and raised in Nigeria, and that's where they were raised. And I actually have two older half sisters that were also raised in Nigeria, but I was born here in the United States of America, in Providence, Rhode Island, to be specific. And so growing up, well, I always had this combination of two cultures. And so I tease and joke around with my communities, and I say, depending on the situation and the time, I choose what I'm representing. So there'll be times where I'm like, today I am very American, and then others today I'm very Nigerian. Just because both cultures have so many things that I find to be so rich and beautiful. So Nigerian culture is really big on community, and so it's really powerful the way in which community can kind of rally around individuals. That can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes community can be too involved, but really there is a beauty to kind of seeing that. And so I love embracing elements of that portion of my culture. And then sometimes I love the independence that I see in the American culture and that I get to experience, where you are have the ability to kind of break free, do things differently, question, challenge thoughts, and be innovative. I think some of those elements can be found more readily in my American culture. So it's just really, I enjoy the privilege of being able to see the world from this dual lens, thanks to my parents,
Mm,
coming in and breaking out of their norm and trying something new. And so that's why you'll see me rep it all the
mm.
time.
Wow. Yeah. Talk about getting out your comfort zone. Your parents, they were really about that. So do you speak any, can you speak the language,
So
Nigerian?
my parents are from the Yoruba tribe, and so I did learn how to speak it. I understand it more when I speak it. I don't have all the proper intonations. The Yoruba language is almost like a musical language. There are certain things that you say with a high intonation. So, for example, my name, I say it's Temi Takwe, but if I want to use the proper Yoruba intonation, I'm going to say Temi
Hmm.
Takwe. There's a very specific
Oh,
rhythm to it. Mhm. And in
oh,
terms
I
of the way
see.
that you write it, there's actual symbols that you write on terms on the alphabet that kind of dictate the intonation, and that's where I usually mess up. I mess up when it
Hmm.
comes to a lot of the intonations for the various words, but I understand it. I understand the general conversational Yoruba. One of the elements of the Yoruba culture is they're very big on proverbs. And folks who speak proverbs in Yoruba usually confuse me because I don't understand it when they start using some of that language. I'm like, okay, this is where I'm very American. I don't understand. But but I am grateful that, there are many elements of the language that my parents mother tongue, that I get to, understand and use in certain instances. So occasionally I'll throw out a couple of phrases, or sometimes because I'm still very connected to the culture, I can sometimes bring out an accent that is not necessarily authentic from me being born and raised there, but is authentic because I've always been in community in the Nigerian community.
Hmm.
So it's just a very, very interesting world.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, you got the best of both worlds. Sounds like, man, that's pretty amazing. Now, I wanted to ask that because I'm pretty sure somebody said, "Well, okay, well, I'm looking at her last name. Where is she from? What, you know?" So I'm glad you shared that information with our audience. Okay, now I want to ask, also, of course, in growing up as a child, I saw that you wrote a contract to your mom and dad. Looks like it says around 7 or 8 years old. So tell us about this contract that you wrote and what was it all
I
about?
love that question because it was funny. I kind of forgot that I did this. It was so intuitive, and it wasn't until recently I was thinking a little bit about my journey as a professional, thinking about how sometimes there are traits and little hints to where you're kind of going in your childhood that you can overlook. And so I realized I remember very clearly when I was 7 or 8 years old, talking to my parents about chores, and they're like, "Okay, we want you to do more chores. We want you, to be sweeping. We want you to wash the dishes. We want you, just things that they wanted me to do in the house." And I was like, this sounds great. Let's talk allowance. Like, you want to talk
Hmm.
chores? Let's talk payment. And so I told them, okay, how much are you going to pay me? They told me how much they wanted to pay me. And I just thought it was natural to write this thing down in a contract. Like, now that I'm an adult, I think
Wow.
back and I'm like, that is very strange for a 7 or 8 year old to be thinking about contracts. But then it
Hmm.
just felt like the obvious thing to do. So I remember you remember loose leaf paper, your line paper. I remember having that. So
Yeah.
maybe I was 9. It was between 7 or 9. I think it was 7 or 8, just because I'm thinking about when my brother was born, and I think he was younger at that time. But anyways, I remember getting this loose leaf sheet of paper and writing out on the loose leaf sheet of paper their names and saying, we promise to pay Tammy this amount of money every day, or on this day when she does the following. And I remember listing out the different chores. Like, I remember it was like check, like all the different things they asked me to do. And there was like more than 5. It was probably 10 to 11, 10 to 12 different items that I listed. And so at the end, when I finished, I remember making the lines for all the parties to sign. So I signed it, I put my signature on it. I had my parents put their signature on it. And then once it was ready, I took it and I put it on the fridge. And I was like, okay, now they know that they have to pay me. Because I figured once you put it on a contract, like, you have to do it. That's a promise. Um, Never got paid. Didn't quite work. Taught me a very, very important lesson that you need to be able to enforce your rights. So yeah, there's an
Wow.
outstanding contract. I need to call my mom and ask her about this, actually. But it's just funny to me to think
Wow.
back to kind of how intuitive or how native that kind of felt to me back then, and kind of seeing where I am now, and just how God leaves these little hints in your journey.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask because I mean, there's no way I would have thought to write a contract to my mom or dad. First of all, if I had tried to write a contract, they'd be like, "You better get out of here." They would probably balled it up, threw it away. But I mean, for you to be an attorney today and to actually be writing contracts, I mean, I'm just trying to think, how did I don't know, how did that thought even come to your mind to even Write a contract.
I'm really wondering, but I part of me is thinking that it might have come from my parents. My father, he's late now. He passed away a couple of years ago. But he wanted to be an attorney. And so one of the things that I
Mm,
know and I found out later that my mom too, she actually wanted to be an attorney. My father more his desire was a little bit more pressing than hers, but they both had this legal interest. But I know my dad was very big on writing. And so I'm wondering if there was something in our conversation at some point, if he had referenced something. But I even when I think back to it, I don't remember any conversations per se with them about contracts. So it might have been things that I saw on TV that kind of stuck out to me. So I don't really know exactly where that came from. I just think it's funny. And it didn't dawn on me until maybe a couple of months ago or a couple of years, maybe the past year, yeah, a couple of years ago actually, where I remembered that and I was like, "Huh, that's interesting." I can't think to where exactly that originated, but it could have been a combination of a couple of different things.
wow, that is an amazing story. Just that you actually wrote the contract, and you're an attorney today. That's pretty amazing. I guess it's funny that you didn't get paid, but you did you did write the contract. So, but hey, you get I guess you can't
You
win them
can't win
all.
them all, and just an aside, because I am an attorney, so we'll talk about some life stuff, but this is the takeaway,
Hmm.
right? There are sometimes people are like, "I wanna write contracts," but they haven't actually done their proper vetting, their due diligence, right? And so, you sign a contract with somebody who doesn't have any assets and isn't as immoral, and you think you're gonna be able to enforce it, you're gonna run into issues. So, I used to do a program where I used to say, "Contracts don't cure crazy." Whereas, like, the fact that you have a contract in place, what if the person is judgment proof, right? You've entered into a very serious arrangement with somebody, but they do not have the capacity to pay you back. These are some of those elements that people don't
Wow.
really think about. And so they're like, I want a contract, but the contract is not going to replace your due diligence. A contract is not going to replace your ability to really go and look at the person that you're engaging with or the type of arrangement that you have and consider whether it's sound. So now I'm looking back and I think back to my little childhood lesson in terms of I had a contract, but was I able to enforce it? One of those things, and just a little sprinkle of some legal advice to throw in there.
Yes, yes, man, that is something. That is an amazing story, though. Thank you for sharing that. And just speaking of you being an attorney, so for those who don't know in our audience, he's an attorney, but and this is what I want to talk about next here is that you started out in the educational field as a teacher, and so tell us, I guess, first about your experience as a teacher. You know, how did you get into education, maybe, and just I guess just tell us about your role as a teacher.
Absolutely. So when I so here's the interesting thing to me is I remember being in school. I love learning. I really, really do. And I remember looking at educators and thinking that their job was so hard and so difficult. And kind of I remember not wanting to be an educator because I thought of that role as being almost so precious and so sacred, in terms of the work that they were called to do. Fast forward a couple of years, I go to school. I'm an English major in college and it's time to graduate. And I'm looking actively at law schools. I am applying, I'm taking the LSATs and things like that, but I didn't feel ready to jump into that journey. And so I was starting to explore and I was like, what would I want to do? Um, and so I remember going to a career fair and the organization Teach for America was there. And so I was able to connect with someone there. We ended up going to meet up for lunch and they told me a little bit more about the program. And you know how I mentioned earlier with my little story with my contract, how there are little hints about the ways in which you'll do things throughout your life. Well, I still have a little hints of education from when I was younger as well. I have a significant age gap between my both of my siblings. And so one of them, it's close to 7 years. The other one is like 14 years. So I remember teaching them various things when we were home. And my mom used to teach as well. So her education, she would teach us, of course. And then being a big sister, I remember teaching my siblings, how to write. I remember teaching my younger sister how to read.
Mm,
All of these little things that I just did as part of it just felt natural to me. So now I'm finishing up college. I know that I don't want to go into law, and I have this opportunity to look at Teach for America. And as I learned about the organization, it really aligned with where I was in that time of my life, which was I wanted to give back to the community. That's something that is important to me. But I also wanted to kind of earn a living, and I wanted to explore. I was able to kind of move and try something new, and so I applied for Teach for America. I remember going through right before, I think they had 4 application rounds. This might have been the third or the fourth one. And it was like the very last day. I submit my application, and it's a very competitive role. And I was able to get through, move on to the next round, go through that we had a group interview process where you had to do a little lesson. And I remember doing a lesson using, it was an English lesson. And I remember taking a rap lyric and teaching my students about figurative language. We had 15 minutes, but using that to teach them about figurative language and how that would work. And I got accepted into this program, and Teach for America actually was what moved me from Georgia, which is where I went to high school and college, to Texas. I came here and I taught to Texas in the Alief Independent School District. I taught 8th grade for a number of years, and it was a very rewarding experience. Now, there were, of course, challenges because if you've dealt with teenagers or preteens, they're interesting. The
Yes. Oh, yes.
I always say that this is the issue with that age group, is that they think they're grown. They're convinced. And if you remember,
Yes.
I remember when I was their age, was convinced I was grown too. But they're still they're little kids in big people's bodies, right? They're growing, they're doing, but it was really, it was, I always consider my time teaching as an extension of my education as well. Learning about the world around me. I moved from Georgia in the safe confines of being in my parents', vicinity, in their neighborhood, right with them, to across the country to Texas by myself. And I had to learn how to live on my own, and then teach and take care of classrooms, and deal with administration, and deal with angry parents, and deal with kids who were upset some days, and deal with kids who were also dealing with other systemic issues in their community. And so kind of having all of these, and just this really beautiful opportunity to look at life from all of these various lenses, that's kind of how I summarize my education. And I feel like, as a result, even though I'm not in the classroom, I'm not in the middle school classroom anymore, I still consider myself both a learner and an educator, because I love learning. I'm never going to stop. But I also love to teach. It's just something that is again one of those threads that I've seen throughout my life that I get really excited about, and I'm really passionate about. So,
Wow. Yeah. Um, I guess that fits if you're teaching even as a kid, and I guess it just felt natural for you. But also, I guess too, like you said, you still like to teach, which is great. And I mean, you're a keynote speaker as well, so you're still, even though you're an attorney, you're still teaching others. So I think that's amazing or great that you're able to do still both of those as an attorney and still give back, like you said, to the community and teach. So awesome. Okay, so you're in the education field and you're teaching, and this is where you are. You said this is what felt comfortable to you at the time, or it just felt right. So how do you pivot? How does Tammy pivot from education to being an attorney?
great question, and I love that you mentioned comfort, because one of there's a couple of different threads. One thread is that it started to become uncomfortable, which was really interesting. I I would have been really content being a teacher had I no longer had God maybe not, or God stirred something up in me where I was just no longer, it was no longer fulfilling. And I never wanted to be the educator in the classroom who was just there for the paycheck. The majority of your
Mm.
educators have the right heart and they have the right spirit behind them, but there are a lot who don't, and they are a detriment to our educational system. And so I was not going to be that. So when I started sensing that tension where I was not getting that fulfillment and I wanted to kind of break away, I said, I need to take those active steps. And so I started to explore what that would look like to go back to law. Another thing that was also happening is the realm in which I was teaching. So I started teaching through a program called Teach for America, like I said. And the unique thing about Teach for America is that Teach for America places new or recent graduates in low income neighborhoods to kind of help bridge the achievement gap. And so I was working in a low income community where I was seeing the impacts of poverty on a day-to-day basis in my classroom. Perfect example, and this was actually
Mm.
one of the things that I referenced in my application to law school. One of the elements that we have to do is we have to write a personal statement. And I remember recalling the time that one of my students was talking about having to like navigate or finagle his hands to unlock the door because his family was effectively evicted from their home. They were locked out and they didn't want to be
Wow.
homeless. So they had to figure
Mm.
out a way to get in. And I remember hearing those stories. Or I remember the day after one of the days during dismissal. I remember my students talking about one of my students brought out this notebook and she was looking through it. And, me being the teacher trying to figure out what's going on, just connecting with my students, I asked her, I'm like, oh, what are you looking at? And it's like this notebook that has a letter or a collection of letters from her uncle, I think, who was incarcerated. And it brings up this conversation
Mm.
in this classroom. And I start talking, and I'm realizing that this kid has a family member that's incarcerated, and that child has a family member that's incarcerated, and that child has a family member that's incarcerated. And I'm thinking about all of these systemic issues that my children are bringing into the classroom each day. And then thinking about
Mm.
the educational realm where, especially right now, maybe things are better, but at the time that I was kind of in this transition, there was so much pressure on educators and not a lot of support. So there's these outside issues that students were bringing in, and then all of these pressures put on teachers to be miracle workers. Right. And they are miracle workers. It's
Mm.
beautiful to see it happening every single day that teachers would overcome the fact that they are not given enough money to kind of buy the materials, that they're spending their own money to buy materials for their students, and then dealing with kids who may or may not have
Yeah.
parents who are working two or three jobs and who are not present, or dealing with actual hunger because they're in places where they can't afford food to eat, right? Dealing with all of
Mm.
those different issues, and I'm looking at this systemic issue, this systemic imbalance, and I'm becoming more restless, because I'm seeing all of these things. And so as that's happening, as I'm looking at the system and I'm like, I don't really want to be part of the system because I don't like the way it's treating teachers, and how I'm thinking about what are the ways in which I might be able to support educators in a different realm. What would that look like? I started to remember my dreams, or I started to remember the law has this tool to deal with systems and a tool to deal with structures in our society. And I started thinking about what if there were ways in which I could impact these additional elements from the outside. And so that was one of the things that really drove me. I honestly thought that when I started law school, I was going to go into more policy, dealing with housing policy, for example, things like with regards to that based off of what I'd seen. And that was one of the driving forces in terms of getting me moving from this place of being in the classroom to being in law school. So that was the catalyst, or one of the threads that catalyzed my movement into the legal world.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. So you started to feel the pressure from the classroom. Like you said, trying to be this miracle maker, which, and I think I see that, or I hear the stories. And actually, my mother-in-law, she was educated for like 20 something years until she finally just, she got out of it, because there is a lot of pressure on the teachers to do all of these things. Fix the kids, fix this child, do this and do that, and of course, they also got to have their kids to reach success, and that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. And
But
then
I
I,
get
I don't mean to interrupt you, but one of the things that I always think about is I feel like I saw a shift also from the way we were raised, in terms of, at least for me, my mom and the educators were on the same team for me. And I don't know when that
yes.
shifted, where became the educators versus the families, right? And I
Mm.
loved and missed, and I believe that the key to more success in our education is that realliance, that alliance between our families and our communities. And that when that shift started to happen, when I was like, oh, I'm, as an educator, we're being viewed as we're the things, the problems that need to be fixed, instead of we are co-laborers in this, in this journey to educate our children. Like, that was one of those things that really got me. And so even now, when I'm not, I'm not a parent, but I'm still, again, connected to folks who are parents. When I hear conversations, I'm constantly describing and encouraging parents, how can you make sure that you and your child's educators are aligned in terms of these goals of educating your children, like remembering how to be a community again. That was one of those really big things. So I wanted to put that out there just because it's very important to me, and I think that's one of the areas where our education system is sometimes losing its way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I know when I was a kid, like you said, the education system and the everything, the community, parent, everything was aligned. Like I could go to school and my teachers, they were almost like my
Mm-hmm.
parents. They were just like my parents. You know, it was the same enforcement, it was the same thing, and they knew that they could contact my parents, and if they contact my parents, if I'm getting in trouble, whatever, it's not gonna be good. So everything was aligned. But yeah, it's true today that and I feel for educators today because a lot of them feel stuck. And I guess, and that's a question I guess to have for you because I know a lot of educators, and as a matter of fact, a lot of educators go to my church. So maybe you can add some thoughts to this. But as far as like you felt a shift to change, you felt the pressure, and you actually pursued that. And of course, we'll talk more about your pursuit in being an attorney, but like, I guess I don't know, what was it that, you just made up your mind that I'm gonna be this attorney? And I guess another thought to that question is what could you offer to those, maybe to some of those educators that feel like they're stuck and they feel like I don't think I'll be able to change careers, because you're an example of actually doing it, changing, pivoting, and making a change. What thoughts maybe could you add to that, to like, how can a person pivot their career if they feel like I don't know, I feel stuck?
I love that question. I love that question. And feeling stuck is so real. It's so honest and genuine and real. And we all feel it at some way and some point. I think one of the things that becomes really, really, really important is understanding that even in our stuckness, we always have a choice. I think one of the things that we unintentionally do is we give up our own power to choose and navigate. And I'll say this, I know that I like to speak real, and I know that there are certain privileges that allow people to make certain pivots. So I'm unmarried, right? I don't have necessarily the same pressures and demands of raising a child and raising a family. And then those might be things that make it a little bit easier for someone like me to pivot. So let's, again, keeping it real. However, you know,
Exactly.
how and so full respect to that, it is definitely more difficult. However, I never want people to relinquish the power of choice, relinquish the power of control, relinquish the idea and the concepts that I could eventually be moved from this. What would that look like? It would mean that you would at some point have to make a decision and then start, even if you decide that it's not going to be next year, it's not going to be in 2 years, it's going to be 5 years and 10 years, deciding to make that actual shift. So while I was teaching, I signed up for an LSAT course because I knew that I needed to take the LSAT again, right? There are other individuals who I know have made the shift. They might not be able to go ahead and take another course, but they're buying the books, right? And they're studying and they're taking those little steps towards whatever it is that they're trying to do. I just don't personally, and this is my own personal conviction, I'm consistently seeking ways to be more aligned, right? More aligned with the way in which I think God has made me and created me and the things and the values that He's placed in my heart. And I try not to diminish those things. I think that if God is giving you a sense of discomfort or giving you something that's pulling you in another way, it's not something to be silenced. It's to be something to be investigated and asked and say, why is this
Mm,
here? Why is this discontentment here? Another thing that I like to consider, and this might be going kind of a little off, not off script, but just a little bit different. I also think that we can craft uniquely how we're designed. So like you said, I'm an attorney, but I'm still doing education. I'm still out there doing things on YouTube. I teach other attorneys. And it's because again of this desire to align with the things that I think are in my core element. And so sometimes that means, and it requires, and it's not going to be for everyone, but sometimes this means you are designing something that never existed before. You are designing a path that never existed before. So perhaps you're trying to pivot and go into an industry that you've never done before, and maybe you've never seen anyone do it. That might mean that you're the person who's designing and blazing that trail, right? And it might be just one step at a time, but give yourself that grace to say, I can take this journey one step at a time. Maybe I don't need a transition fully immediately. Maybe it starts with a side hustle. I know plenty of educators who are right now who are looking at different things, who are starting their various side hustles. They're not able to fully leave their main employment, and there's nothing, no shame, nothing wrong with that at all. And they're saying, okay, what can I do in the meantime though? can I do this thing where I'm able to invest in this good, or invest in this talent or this gift or this thing that I want to give the world, right? So it's really about expanding our minds to kind of see and receive these options. I also want to throw out there, like when I was in law school, one of the things that was so cool to me and was encouraging was my mom was also in nursing school, right? And so this was her pivoting as well. One of the things that I know you and I were discussing earlier was like, is there, is there an age limit when it comes to pivoting and changing? And I love that I get to see this example. And maybe that's one of the things that helps me is my mom is also a consistent learner. She reads more than anyone that I know. I look at her and I'm amazed. At how savvy she can be with regards to technology. She's always staying on top of the news and just a wealth of information. And age is never ever a factor for her. She's always saying you are as old as you
Mm,
think you are. And so maybe it's for me seeing that example of somebody who is consistently striving to be better and consistently saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm not going to put an age cap on this and say I can't do this because of something like a number. I'm going to do it." So, of course, there's a give and take. When my mom pivoted and decided that she was going to go to school, it had an impact on my family, on my siblings. They were a little bit younger, but it was something that she did in conjunction with my dad in terms of talking to him and figuring out what that plan would look like. How can we get this done? Not saying it can't be done, but if saying if this desire is there, let me start asking myself how, instead of can it,
mm,
like how can I get this thing done? Right. So that's kind of the
mm.
way I approach those transitions, and kind of looking at the way in which I want to build my life.
Wow, those are some excellent nuggets that you just left there. And I love what you said, not relinquishing the power of choice. And I just want to throw this plug out there. We could probably, and I want to say, we could probably do a whole episode on just talking about that right there, because I think that's what maybe gets people where they feel like they're stuck. And I like how you said that, though. We all got a choice. Don't relinquish that power of choice. Man, that
And
is
I want to
awesome.
add there, because
I
I know
love that.
sometimes people are like, I don't really have a choice. Even if you have a choice between two bad options, you still have a choice. Because and no, we hate to do that, but I guess because, and maybe it's an element of me seeking out ways to empower myself. Even in situations that are uncomfortable, I'm gonna look for the choice that I have. And I'm gonna take advantage of it. One of the things that they taught us in Teach for America was the idea of the locus of control. The locus of control is really examining what is within my control and what is not. And having a clear understanding of what I can actually control is so empowering, because then you can focus your energy on only controlling that. A lot of times we're also trying to shift our control and figure out, oh, can I control this? You're trying to change the entire system. You can impact the system, but if you can't control another person who is in that system, right? I recognize that, and I encourage people to kind of recognize what is in the locus of control. So, what can you can control? You can control your response to things. You can control your attitude.
Yep.
You can control your decisions, right? You can control your mindset. Like you can make active decisions about those things. Seek out what you can actively control. There's a lot of stuff you can't control. You can't control your circumstances sometimes. You can't control the way somebody else is going to respond. You can't control those. But what are the things you can control? Are you leaving those things unattended? you know?
Mm, yeah.
So
Man. Man. Miss Tammy is she's putting it
I'm
all on the
trying.
line.
I'm trying.
No, that's good. That's good. But that's true. I mean, and that's what we got to look at. And I think that, I mean, just from what you're saying, not relinquishing the power of choice and the things that we do have control. We have a choice. And I guess it just comes down to not sitting still and just going after what it is that you feel you can do. Like you said earlier, even if it's you taking small steps, start a side hustle or figure out a way you can do this. I mean, like you're an attorney, but you're a speaker. You also have a YouTube page. You also have all of these other things that you have aligned with being an attorney, and it goes with, of course, everything that you do now. But
Mhm.
man, those are some excellent thoughts. Wonderful. All right, so now you're an attorney, or you pivot from being in education, and now you're an attorney. So what was it like? I guess getting into into the legal world. What was that like?
That was different. It was refreshing to be around adults again for a while. I still miss my kiddos a little bit. They're all my other kids I taught are adults. They're in the workforce now. It's amazing. Um, but it was a different. I feel like law school first and foremost was a little different for me because sometimes people go straight through undergraduate into law school, and I had that gap of that extension of my education as a teacher. So I went into law school with a very almost a very practical perspective in terms of there is a whole real world outside of law school exams. And so when I was in law school, I was seeking out really practical educational experiences. So I took our trial clinics, I took our immigration clinic, things that would kind of put me in contact with what it would be like to be an attorney. What are some of those skill sets? All that being said, it never really actually prepares you for being an attorney.
Mhm.
It's one of my soapbox that I will not get on in terms of the legal education system. But after graduating, I remember getting my bar card and just being like, "Oh my gosh, I have this thing that recognizes me as an attorney. What do I do?" And for a long time, I struggled with with waiting for somebody else to give me permission to go out there and do law and practice the way that I wanted to. Because and I think a lot of young graduates kind of feel that way, where you've now gotten the title, you've gotten the degree, you're this thing, but like, how do you actually like prove that to the world? And so I had to kind of go through some of that. I went through some imposter syndrome. I remember situations, for example, when I first started, right now I'm a business lawyer, but when I first started, I actually thought I've done a lot of pivots. I thought I was going to do
Mhm.
criminal and immigration because of my background. I have a lot of personal connections with immigration law. And I wanted to see if there's a way I could impact it. But from a substantive legal perspective, it never really engaged my mind. I didn't really find the actual area of law as fascinating as I wanted it to be, but I was like, hey, let me try. But criminal law I found super fascinating, and I had a little bit of a knack for it. So I thought I was going to do a criminal law and immigration kind of overlap, where I would deal with people who were accused of crimes, who had an immigration component to it, and how that would impact the law. And so all of this is to say, I used to be in the criminal courthouses often. And I remember sitting in there and being scared to kind of go to where the attorneys would be. And I would always sit in the gallery. And it just took me like having to have these conversations with myself, like, yo, they gave you a bar card. Like, they gave you the license. You could do this there. You don't have to ask for any permission. And so
Yeah, you're an attorney now, Tammy.
you're an
You're an
attorney,
attorney.
having these conversations with myself, it would be so scary, and, for no reason. It would be, well, because again, imposter syndrome, but I was terrified. One of the other
Yeah.
things that helped me was I got in community with, some mentors and some other young attorneys like myself, and watching some of them would be helpful. So I had one friend in particular, who was a white male, and it would be really interesting to kind of watch him navigate the room and not have the same fears as me, and me like, so what's, both of you are attorneys, there's nothing different here. Why are
Mhm.
you holding yourself
Right.
back? And then I would kind of like push myself, like, okay, like, just show up. You saw the way he walked up to the front. Next time you go there, walk up to the front, go introduce yourself to everybody. And and being in that type of community challenged me. So I say this, I'm going to throw this out there as well in terms of our entrepreneurs and just business people and people who are trying to grow. Sometimes there's a lot to be learned from those environments that you're not comfortable in, or environments where people might not look exactly like you and where you might be different. Sometimes we have to push ourselves to be in those, and it can be an uh interesting uh, thread to kind of toe the line, but it's important, I think, because there's a lot of insight that can be gained from that type of exposure. So being in that community
Mhm.
exposed me, right? And I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna try that, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna try that. And trying this, trying that, trying this, trying that, you start learning, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this, I can do that. That's a strength, that's a weakness. I'm not so good there. But you start learning yourself when you start putting yourself in these environments where you're challenged with something that you might not have known before. And so you're starting to get data about yourself even. And then you're able to kind of just refine some of your skill sets. So that was the beginning of my legal career. I was doing a lot of criminal defense, going to courtrooms, really learning how to meet up with people and connect that way. And then I know one of the things you might ask is like, okay, because Tammy, you might not have realized that I'd ever done criminal defense. Is like, so wait, how did you get into business?
Yeah, that was gonna be a question. I mean, yeah,
So I would just throw that out there
yeah.
because it's another interesting pivot story. So I started getting more comfortable with my criminal defense practice, and I actually have a huge heart for indigent representation. There are a couple of organizations I love. One's called Gideon's Promise, another is calling Restoring Justice. And these are organizations that are geared towards really helping people who are low income, who have been accused of crimes, and giving them fair and just representation. But
Mm,
along those same lines, being in that environment again, I started to feel something very similar to what I was feeling as a teacher, which is this tension with is I want to make sure that I'm in here and I'm affecting the right change and I'm most aligned with my gifts and my talents. And then also looking at the ways these systems are structured. So for me, the one of a pivotal moment for me was the day that Philando Castile was killed. And it was so pivotal for me because I remember waking up and going to the courthouse and and in that moment, right, it we there was already a season where there had been protests about, young African Americans being killed at the hands of law enforcement. And there had been all these protests. And I knew with the protests before Philando Castile that they weren't going to shift things the way that I kind of was hoping that they would shift. Like I remember feeling that sense because I understood the system. And then Philando Castile happening and being like, we're going to protest again and something else is going to happen. And recognizing that although there is work to be done in the criminal justice system, there are fighters there. They are my friends. Just like I know that there are fighters in the educational system. They are my friends. They are my colleagues. They're people I respect. There is still more work to be done in certain other systems. And some of those other
hmm
systems for me that I felt like I really want to start impacting is I want to start looking at the systems that are involved in the private, not private wealth, but really in the business realm. Because a lot of times money speaks. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you might have passion, in all of these other areas. So passionate about the educational realm and passionate about the criminal defense realm. But if you want to impact those various realms, they need finances. Like when we talk about indigent representation, you talk about our public defenders offices across the nation. So many of them are underpaid in terms of the caseloads that they're being given. When we're talking about our educators, it's the same thing. Where are they getting this additional support? Are we empowering people from a financial and economic standpoint in order to actually facilitate the changes that we want to see in the world? Those were the conversations that started happening in my mind, particularly around the time Philando Castile was killed. And I started becoming again more frustrated and feeling that tension in terms of this is where I am, but I feel like I might be more effective in this realm. And so, and then I also had a
Mm,
community of entrepreneurs around me that would ask me questions. And I kept on being like, well, that's not quite my area. And I kind of would like try and not help because I felt uncomfortable. This was not an area that I was as well versed in. I was well versed in criminal defense work. I understood it. I loved it. It was something that kind of came more intuitive to me. But when my business clients would ask me, or my friends who were entrepreneurial would ask me questions, I would shy away from it until I had a friend who I kind of let her do her own thing. And then she came back to me and she made a really simple, basic mistake. And I felt so terrible because I was like, this is something simple that I could help you with. But because I was in my feelings insecure, I didn't provide my services in that realm. I didn't make myself available to
mm,
provide something that could have easily saved you money, saved you energy, saved her, all this attention. And so this whirlwind of experiences kind of happening at the same time started getting me towards, hey, people, you have an audience here, a captive audience, in terms of people who are business clients who are needing help. And so in terms of that, so in terms of that kind of coming through, I started to ask, how I could begin to pivot. And so I started to do that.
hmm.
So
And that's how you got into uh, being a business attorney from all of those different things.
yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Man, that is some journey. I kind of I like what you said in regards to as far as you being an attorney. You got this. You got an actual card that shows that you passed the bar.
Yes.
You passed the bar, but you still deal with the imposter syndrome where you're scared, you're afraid, and I think a lot of us deal with that, where we got the skills, but it's like I don't know, I don't think I can do it. So it sounds like even you, even you dealt with
Yes.
that. So maybe you can touch on that as far as like, because I see you now, of course, and I know, um, and I think we kind of talked about this earlier, where the process, people, they see where you're at, but they don't know the actual journey
Mhm.
and the pitfalls and all of things. And I'm sure you got plenty of
So
stories, but
many.
as far as far as you feeling afraid as an attorney, and you got the, as I say, you got the receipts. You got the receipt that shows you're an attorney, but you're dealing with this imposter syndrome. So what, I don't know, what was it that, I know you said it was community, it was a lot of different things.
Mhm.
So what do you think was it that helped you get over that
I
imposter
don't think
syndrome?
you ever really fully get over imposter syndrome. And I think that's what people need to kind of understand is that if you are growing, if you are trying to strive and do new things, imposter syndrome is always waiting right there for you. And that's what has shifted for me is I've been in so many situations where I am trying something brand new that I recognize that, oh, this like imposter syndrome is a familiar friend now. It's like, oh yeah, here you are showing up telling me that I am not going to do anything. Thanks, I appreciate it. And just moving alongside that. One of my friends, she's told me something and that it's really resonated with me. She told me this years ago and she said own your zero. A lot of time, one other element in terms of
Mm,
imposter syndrome is we are also beating ourselves up because we want to be operating at level 500 when we're just starting. Right? And
mm,
we're beating, we don't have any grace for ourselves. We don't have any grace for ourselves in terms of the process that it takes in terms of growing and improving. And when my friend said own your zero, it was like own the opportunities that come with starting out. When you are brand new to something, that's actually a beautiful opportunity to get more help. There are usually people who want to help facilitate and assist you and things like that. There's hidden gems there. That's a safe place for you to make your mistakes. Like if you started off and you were at 500, if we were all out here, operating, how much exposure comes with being at that certain level? Right now, when you're starting out, some of that is like safe space to perfect. So right now you see my videos and you're like, Tammy, oh my goodness, your videos look great. There was a zero. And those videos did not look great. Those videos were not
mm,
perfect. All right. They weren't at the level where I would have been like, oh, but I had to start there and I had to be okay with that and learn the lessons that came with that level. Right. And pay attention to them and recognize that the lessons that came at that level are only going to come at that level. I was talking to another person a young entrepreneur, and I told them honestly, entrepreneurs who haven't gone through anything, I don't trust them because in real life business, you're going to go through things. So, for example, right now we're looking at the tech industry. All of these companies are going forward and they're having to deal with layoffs. They're impacting people's
mm-hmm.
lives. People might look and be like, oh my
Yes.
goodness, like being able to navigate the weight of that responsibility is
Mm,
is immense, and you learn how
mm,
to grow your capacity to deal with that type of weight in those level zeros, in those areas where nobody kind of sees you, when you're dealing with your own personal failures and you're navigating, okay, I messed this up, I embarrassed myself here, I said the wrong thing here, I did the wrong thing here. Can you learn how to navigate that? This is one of the areas where I think that now I'm going to jump back to like my educational background, because this is one of the areas where I think we fail our students. A lot of our students, a lot of our children don't know how to navigate challenges because we shield them from them instead
mm,
of walking with them through them. It is okay for a child to struggle with the subject. It is okay for a child to not know something. We don't want them to deal with that. We are scared of them dealing with the fact that, oh, I'm not the best at math. It's okay to not be the best at math. When you recognize you're not the
mm-hmm.
best at math, how can we help you figure out how again? Right? How can we support you in navigating those challenges? Those are the things that we don't know. But I've learned that over time now because I've messed up so many times. I've been in places where I've made mistakes in public, I've made mistakes in private, I've done things. And you
Yeah.
learn that that's the nature of the game. But I wouldn't have learned all the lessons that I've learned without making these mistakes. I wouldn't have learned all these lessons without trying all these things. And so for the person who's dealing with imposter syndrome, just know that that means that doing something new, that you're not staying stagnant, that you're challenging yourself, which is really, really, really beautiful. And know that that's part of it. You're not doing anything wrong if you're feeling like you're an imposter. It probably means that you're doing something right, and that you should keep doing that. And just know that that feeling of discomfort is probably going to be there, and it's okay. You know.
Mm, it's okay.